Hello, Sir Kyle here. Many of you refer to me as your favorite influencer's coach, but in all honesty, I'm here to serve anyone in the fitness community that has the desire to make a lifestyle change and is willing to put the required work in. Today, I come to you with the first installment of an educational series that aims to provide clarity and understanding to the most trivial questions the fitness community faces. The topic that we'll be discussing today is none other than protein. Let's first assess what is protein. Protein is a complex, large molecule made up of amino acids that is essential to many bodily functions. So without it, it's safe to say you're compromising your overall health. And when it comes to the gym, protein is essential for making any progress. Now, we know protein is essential, but just how much protein do we actually need? Now that answer is going to vary depending on if you're a male or female, but more specifically, how much muscle mass one person carries. Now, I'd be lying to you if I told you there is a specific amount of protein you need. However, there is a roundabout calculation you can use that will meet your daily requirement. Simply taking one's lean body mass and multiplying it by 1 to 1.5 pounds per pound of weight will generally lead you in the right direction. For some individuals, a little bit more protein is helpful, and for others, you can keep protein a bit lower. Depending on the dieting phase that you're going through, if someone is trying to preserve muscle mass and they're in a caloric deficit, your requirements may be a little higher to retain that muscle mass. And on the contrary, if someone's looking to build a ton of muscle in the gym and they're in a caloric surplus, there's a limit in terms of how much protein is actually needed and useful. Now that we have a roundabout amount of grams of protein that we should be consuming, a question that often comes to mind is how often should I be eating to consume said amount of protein? Unfortunately, the answer isn't once per day, as you can only digest and absorb so much protein at a time. My best advice is splitting your protein intake up evenly throughout the day over the course of meals that you're eating. So to just provide an example, let's say your daily requirement is around 200 grams of protein, and you're a person that likes to eat 5 meals per day. You would simply take 200 grams of protein divided by the 5 meals, which will yield approximately 40 grams of protein, give or take, per meal. Now, regardless of how many meals you choose to have, it's important to pay attention to how much time is in between these meals. A safe measure would be approximately 2 to 3 hours minimum between feeding times.
What are your thoughts on the 30-gram protein? Can't consume more than it because you're going to not digest it. It's not going to work. You can't consume 50, 60 grams per meal, that type of thing.
An interesting question and often misconception. Now, everyone absorbs and digests their food a bit differently. A good thing to pay attention to is perhaps your bowel movements, not to be grotesque, but that will often indicate how successful you are at processing different nutrients. When it comes to protein, I think 30 grams per hour or whatever they claim isn't always essentially backed by the proper research. And I encourage you to push the limits a bit. Be careful, however. My suggestion is not to go to 60 to 90 grams and try to make that digestible per hour. However, I have found great success with many of my clients, including myself, where I can push it to about 45 to 60 grams per meal, pending the case in point.
So with that, then, you talked about bowel movement, digestion. What would be your recommended top sources of protein?
I think it's important to note that not all protein is created equal. Just like every human is not created equal. We may have similarities. However, we all have our own quirks and character traits that make us unique. Protein specifically, I've always recommended to people to source high quality ingredient foods, looking for grass-fed and finished meats and beef. Good poultry choices are always going to yield better results from a digestive standpoint than perhaps a generally processed product you may find in the snack aisle at your favorite convenience store.
Yeah, so you wouldn't recommend protein bars?
I can't say I'm a fan of many protein bars, though they do taste pretty good.
What about whey protein?
Whey protein is excellent. However, we want to dive a little deeper than just whey protein, as there are different types of filtration that takes place. But what you're going to find the best success with and be at ease with your digestion is generally a whey isolate.
If you were to use a certain whey isolate, is there a brand that you like and prefer?
I do have my favorites, specifically Sledge farm fed. Now, there are many different flavors for those that might not love the apple pie. However, regardless of how poor you may think something tastes, when it's comprised of high quality ingredients, your stomach will always thank you.
So with the whey, still on the whey topic, you'll hear people claim from the mainstream side of fitness that protein powder is not a real food, even though you're using 100% whey isolate. Obviously, you don't want to use a whey protein powder for all your meals, but where would you plug it in? How frequently, or like how often per day, how many times per day would you maybe use a whey isolate? Is it just a supplement to you, or would you actually use it as a protein source for a meal or two?
So there are many factors that would go into the decision making and how often one uses a protein powder. In my younger years, and in many clients that I coach, timing is of essence. Perhaps they're not always prepared. So, in that case, such as back in my younger years, having a quality protein powder, I might find myself using 2 to 3 times per day to supplement 2 to 3 meals per day. Generally speaking, I try to never exceed 2 to 3 shakes per day, or perhaps if we have our nice creations of bowls of cream of rice or baked goods, that 2 to 3 times per day limit comes from experience with many people having digestive issues. As I've grown wiser through my experience, I always prefer whole foods, but again, a good whey isolate is going to be your best friend when it comes to making sure you can adhere to a nutritional plan that has a moderate to higher protein daily requirement.
So what if I'm traveling, I'm on the go, didn't have time, or I just wasn't able to pack a meal?
What I prefer and recommend to anyone is to take your favorite quality protein powder, specifically Sledge farm fed, and have it in Ziploc baggies weighed out to the corresponding amount that works for your dietary needs, and you can add it simply to a water bottle at your convenience.
What are your thoughts on the post-workout anabolic window, needing protein immediately, or you're going to go catabolic and shrink and lose all your fucking gains?
The post-workout window. A true misconception that I fell victim to in my early years. However, quite frankly, it's just not true. That window does exist to an extent to where your body is more sensitive and likely to absorb nutrients. However, the reality is it's not 15 to 30 minutes, whatever that myth is written as, and it's more of 1 to 2 hours.
Say you're dieting, you're losing weight, or you're bulking per se and you're gaining weight. How often would you, or if you would at all, change the number that you're going to be consuming in grams for protein? Like, does it change alongside the scale when that changes and your body weight's fluctuating? Like, how often would you recalculate your intake?
So I think it's important to pay attention to what the desired goal is. If we're cutting down to get into fantastic shape, perhaps looking to compete on stage, you're going to want to rely on protein a bit more than usual. Now, do I want someone having 90 to 95% of their caloric intake be from protein? No, that's just quite frankly going to not be very helpful in any extent. However, what I find to be pretty helpful when people are dieting is to try to get that protein intake up a bit higher than, say, when they're in an improvement season or in their bulking phase, to where they're really looking to put on ample amounts of muscle. At the end of the day, you need carbohydrates and fats as well. So don't scrutinize protein, though it's essential to progress being made in the gym. It's just a vital nutrient, just as carbs and fats.
You mentioned protein from a muscle preservation standpoint. Now, what would you say as far as consuming ample amounts of protein at maybe, say, certain times of the day?
So, protein is essential for muscle building and also for preserving muscle and amplifying your gains, so to speak, or keeping them. However, there are times in which I wouldn't want my protein too high with a meal. And what I mean by that, if I'm going to be working out in, say, 45 minutes to 1 hour, and maybe I'm behind on my protein intake for the day, the last thing I would suggest is doubling up on protein before a workout. And instead, I rather save that for maybe after the workout or later in the day before bed, for example. The reason being simply, protein is going to slow transit time. In other words, you will digest things much slower when you have protein involved. So if my workout is in 45 minutes and I overslept and I can't meet my buddy on time, which hasn't ever happened, I will always reduce my protein intake. That way my carbohydrates can be digested a bit faster.
Okay, so one that I always usually find myself in, this is definitely more niched, but back to like the sources and shit. I've always find myself, most meals are going to be a lean protein, like a chicken breast or a 99 turkey or something like that, or it's whey isolate. Now, when it comes to red meat, would you only consume that maybe once a day, every other day? And then also, when would you utilize red meat? Obviously, it has more nutrients, added fat content. I'm always finding myself like, should I eat it post-workout? Are the fats not good post-workout? But I see people eating steak post-workout. So like that's where it always confuses me, is like, where would you plug in like maybe red meat meals?
So there's no right or wrong answer to where you should plug in red meat or salmon-based meals. However, there are better times in which I would recommend doing so. The reason I wouldn't typically use red meat before training is, again, from a digestive standpoint, we want to go into a gym full of glycogen and fully digested. Your blood can either be in your muscles or they could be in your digestive tract, but not both at the same time to its fullest capabilities. Beef in itself is always going to digest a little bit slower than, say, chicken breast or turkey, merely from what it's comprised of, the micronutrients, and there's also fats that play a role.
Yeah, like, I've seen those type of people eating fucking beef and pasta 5 times a day. Not optimal from a digestive standpoint.
Yeah, I think the main thing when it comes to protein is doing your best to be consistent with your intake. Like many things in life, you can't make up for missed meals. And what I mean by that, or missed time, to kind of come full circle there, if you are great with your diet 5 days a week and you hit your requirement of the example alluded to earlier of 200 grams, that's awesome. However, if days 6 and 7 you don't get any protein intake in, it's going to affect your progress. So when you are tracking how well you're doing and you're having a fair assessment with yourself, or perhaps you're a coach and you're analyzing a situation with a client, being consistent on a daily basis is always going to trump having someone that's perfect 60% of the time. So from a protein standpoint, that's something we want to just keep as consistent as possible. Of course, depending on the day, the type of foods we use, things will be a bit higher or even perhaps a little lower. But generally speaking, if over a 7-day period is equivalent to what's over a 30-day period, that is a good understanding to be used as a source of data moving forward in terms of, hey, is this amount of protein doing a disservice perhaps to my physique, or is it helping me preserve muscle, etc. So that will conclude our educational segment on protein. I do hope you found it helpful, and if you have any questions, please feel free to comment down below, and I'll be more than happy to address them personally. Until next time.